Welcome to Is This a Great Game or What? And our guest this week is Ron Darling, really good Major League pitcher in his day, world champion with the 86 Mets, now one of the best color broadcasters in the game. And he played a crucial role in maybe the craziest game of all time 40 years ago on July the 4th. Mets and Braves. We'll talk all about that in a minute. Ron, this is my son, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. Oh, my goodness. Must look like your mom.
You know, I'm telling you right now, the amount of times I can't believe we started a podcast together, Ron, because people don't know who's talking half the time.
Oh, I know. You guys have very, very similar voices. I know your dad's probably told you this, but, what would it be now? 44 years ago, around this time, I was drafted by this little ball club, the Texas Rangers, and the Dallas Morning News had a reporter who had to interview me, and it ended up being your dad. It was really one of the first guys I ever spoke to as a professional ball player. So,
and now, is it true what he always said, Ron? Did he really look like he was 16 working for a real newspaper?
Yeah, but it was really good. I almost looked 16 then. So,
yeah, things have changed since then. So, Jeff, the Rangers traded Ron Darling and Walt Terrell to the Mets for Lee Mazzilli in one of the worst trades in club history. And I called Joe Klein, the general manager, that afternoon to get response on this. And someone else picked up the phone and they said, sorry, Joe Klein is dead. He jumped off the roof of the Holiday Inn after hearing about the trade. That's how bad a trade it was.
I got a couple of stories about that trade. So the reason the Rangers had to make that trade is because I believe Mickey Rivers was their free agent. So he would come every day to spring training, sit outside, and he had a Cadillac with horns on it. Just sit on the front of the car with the car that had horns. He had to know Mickey. Kind of wanting a job, but he wanted to get paid a certain amount. The Rangers were going to balk, and that's why they ended up getting Lee Mazzilli. But I was traded on April Fool's Day, which is not a cool day to be traded on because you never know. But the day prior, or a couple days prior, Don Zimmer, who was the manager, called me in his office in spring training, as you very much do with young players. And he brought me in the office. He said, listen, you had a great spring training. You're going to go down to Oklahoma City, AAA. You're going to make a few starts, and you're going to be in the big leagues in no time. So I drove from Pompano Beach, Florida, which is on the East Coast, to Plant City, Florida, where no one knows where that is. It took about 3 hours. By the time I had talked to Zimmer, drove 3 hours, and got to my hotel room, the red light was on. Your dad knows what that means. And a message, and the message was that I had been traded. So that's how fast things can work in the major league.
It was crazy. All right, Jeff, what do you want to ask Ron?
Well, we got to start with the fact that we have had your teammate Keith Hernandez on the podcast before. And I'm not sure if you know this, but the entire episode that we had Keith on, Ron, was about my dad and Keith Hernandez both being in the Stratomatic Hall of Fame. So here we have who should be a Hall of Fame first baseman, and all we talked about was rolling a 6-5 on the dice.
Yeah, but those two Stratomatic Hall of Famers, between them, have 11 Gold Gloves, so they've done well. We had a ball player who was going to be a great player, but injuries took away his career, who ended up being a great manager, Ron Gardenhire. And we used to always make fun of him because on the board at Shea Stadium, they would have, like for me, they would say what college I came from. For Keith, it would say he was the 1979 MVP. And for Ron Gardenhire, it would say all district shortstop. That is what the Hall of Fame is.
Oh, we love it. Keith made us laugh out loud a million times, which was so good. Now, Keith was also on, of course, the 85 Mets team that played against the Braves on July the 4th, 1985. The Mets won 16-13. The game lasted 19 innings. Ron Darling pitched the 19th inning. We'll get to that in a minute. The game started at 9:04 because of a rain delay. And with other rain delays, the game lasted a total of 6 hours and 10 minutes and ended at 3:55 in the morning. So, Ron, 40 years later, when you think about that game, what first comes to your mind, having played in maybe the craziest game of all time?
Well, Atlanta at that time was not a great team. They were going through that point, trying to rebuild. Remember, their early 80s were pretty good with Joe Torre, Dale Murphy, and others. In fact, they went to the postseason, I believe, in '82. Murphy was right in the middle of winning MVPs. But their team was not very good then. And we had the great Dwight Gooden was starting that game. And Dwight was right in the middle of his '85 season, where he went 24-4, ended up with a 1.53, pretty automatic win when Dwight pitched in those days. But because of the rain and everything else, and the game starting late, really took Dwight out of play. What I remember about that game is two things. One is that at some point, being on the bench, whether you're a position player, the backup catcher, a pitcher, you had to get into this game. It was just so remarkable. You knew it was remarkable by being just on the bench and seeing what was happening. People were being thrown out. There were a million runs scored, all of that. You had to get in. Even if it was a pinch runner, whatever, you needed to be in that box score. And the second thing is that after I delivered the last pitch to ironically strike out Rick Camp, who had hit the home run to tie it earlier, we came in the clubhouse. And, when you're playing in the middle of finishing a big league game, you have a certain adrenaline that's running through your body, your competitive nature, whatever. And we come in, and just most of our team now has either been thrown out and is watching the game on TV. And as I opened the doors, or we opened the doors, the entire locker room was littered with Bud Light cans and Chick-fil-A wrappers. That's all I can remember for is that it was cans and wrappers everywhere, where half of our teammates were in a state of annihilation, and the rest of us were coming wearily off the field trying to celebrate a win. It was mad.
Well, for the people who aren't familiar with the game, let's put it into perspective. It finishes 16-13, but after 9, it was 8-8. So there were 13 runs that were scored in extra innings. So this wasn't like a 1-1 game and it ended 3-1 or whatever it might be. Like, there were 13 runs. So every time someone would score in the top of the inning, it would get matched in the bottom of the inning and so on. That is the unbelievable portion. And then, Dad, you famously talked about how they fired off the fireworks at the end of the game.
What was that like, fireworks at 4 a.m.?
Well, it was kind of like, if you're a reader, it was kind of like the War of the World. For the folks in Atlanta, I'm sure that being woken up to that had to be something like aliens were invading. It was crazy that they had the audacity to let the fireworks go. But, I'm sure everyone at that stadium felt like we were all in our little world. Anyone who stayed really was allowed to do just about anything as we went along. And Jeff, to answer your question about the runs, it was Keith. We mentioned Keith Hernandez before. He hit for the cycle. That was probably the worst offensive game of all players. 2 home runs and 6 RBIs, 5-for-5 games. It was just total madness. No pitching was allowed, I guess, on that night. And it's a game that honestly will be remembered forever. John Sterling had a great call in it. I know the great Ernie Johnson Sr. Was calling it from the Braves booth. It just it was just really remarkable.
Ron, I know things have changed for pitchers these days. And no disrespect to the time you played, but now they need to know 11 days in advance when they're going to be pitching. They have it. But for you, obviously, as a great major league pitcher, you had rhythms that you had to get into the night before and the day of, but then you're called to go into the game at 3:00 in the morning. Was there any sort of, you knew you were going to get in, as you mentioned before, everybody was going to have a chance to do something, but was there any semblance of organization for you, or you're like, all right, let's do it?
No, I think especially, it's only my second year. So in today's game, I would be much coveted. In those days, it was let's get a win. And no, I never thought about it. I think I pitched 2 days prior and then I pitched 2 days later. I mean, started a game 2 days prior and then ended up starting a game 2 days later. So there was no, there certainly was caution and trying to take care, but not to the degree it is today. And you also felt an obligation to your teammates that it didn't matter what your rhythm was. This was the game that you kind of had to win at some point, and there was no one else. And in those days, it was very, very rare for a position player to take the mound. That would, the old school managers that I played for, and I played for David Johnson, who wasn't an old school manager. They just they did not want to see an everyday player pitch. So I was happy to be in
Right.
the game.
Did you had thrown 8 innings 2 days earlier? Did you have any trouble getting loose, or at 3:45 in the morning? What was that like?
Well, we were all kidding because, those 80s Mets teams are kind of like the Rolling Stones of sports. People want to be a fly on the wall and what happened. But, the Rolling Stones, while things were happening, they also were writing some great songs. So that team was doing a lot of winning in the 80s. It was no. Sorry, repeat your question, Tim. I lost my train of thought.
No, what was it? How did your arm feel having thrown 8 innings 2 days earlier?
No, I didn't. I didn't feel it at all. The adrenaline of going in there, being a part, just too exciting. Not to be a part of, and it was. I couldn't wait to get out there, and it didn't go easy. That inning either.
Right. So you struck out Rick Camp to end the game. Jeff, if you remember, Rick Camp was an 060 lifetime hitter. He hit 1 career home run, and it was in the 18th inning of this game to tie the game. So, Ron, you're on the bench. You guys are all watching this game thinking, we're going to finally win. This guy, there's no chance he can hit a homer. And then he did. What was the reaction when a pitcher hit a home run to tie the game in the 18th?
Well, everyone on our bench knew that Rick could not hit. The late, he was pitcher only, as they have today on travel teams. And so we were pretty safe that it was going to happen. But we had a guy, Tom Gorman, on the mound. And funny things always happen to Tom Gorman. His nickname on our team was Gorfax because he spoke like he was Koufax, but his game was a little earlier in that season. Tom Gorman got a start in Philadelphia, and he had always bragged that at Gonzaga University, a two-way player, and that he was their best hitter. So before the game started at Veterans Stadium, he was taping up his bat for a half hour, telling us all how he was going to hit one out of the ballpark. He lasted 1/3 of an inning, never got an at bat at Veterans Stadium, and the Mets that night lost 26-7. So craziness followed him all season long. And if it was going to happen that a pitcher with an 060 batting average was going to hit a home run, it was going to be against Tom Gorman.
And you mentioned, sorry, Jeff, you mentioned John Sterling. John Sterling said before the Rick Camp at bat, if Rick Camp hits a home run here, it will officially be the craziest game in Major League history. And then he hit a home run. I mean, John Sterling was way ahead of things on this.
Sometimes you get in a game. Tim, you've seen so many games, I'm sure you have with your dad, Jeff. There are certain games that are happening in front of your eyes that there's much more to come. Just know that it can't end this way. There's going to be something else that's going to happen that's going to take it to the next level. And that game was like that. Not that you thought Rick Camp or could predict that Rick was going to hit one out of the ballpark, but you never, ever thought that the game was over until they shut the lights off.
Ron, this is not going to surprise you, but I have a fascination with box scores, right? So I encourage everybody listening to just look up the July 4th, 1985 game. And as we're talking this whole time, I can't get over so many different things. 3 blown saves, right? Tom Gorman ends up actually getting the win from it all. And my favorite part about it might be that 29 runs were scored. Only 4 home runs were hit when 29 runs were scored, and one of them was Rick Camp. It can't happen. It doesn't happen in 2025.
I mean, it's a lost art, isn't it, to enjoy a box score and try to recreate the game from the box score. That's one of the my favorite things to do. The field was unplayable. I guess we should say that. Because of the rain, they did start the game. But you have to remember, baseball in those days wasn't as popular as it is right now, especially in Atlanta. If they were to get 10,000 people to come to a game, that was a lot. And it was a July 3rd, 4th game, because it was July 3rd / 4th, I think, is how it worked out. So this was a big moneymaker for the home team. So you knew as a ball player in the mid 80s, on certain holidays, you were playing. It doesn't matter how much it was raining. It didn't matter how bad the field was. And that field was underwater. It was unplayable, should not have been played. So a lot of the hits were results of guys splashing in the mud and the water out in the field, retrieving balls out of puddles. It was nonsensical, but it sure was fun. It was the equivalent of being a little boy and playing in mud puddles. That's really what
Ron,
the game was.
You guys got 28 hits in that game. 7 guys had 3 or more hits. You're right. Keith hit for the cycle, and a bunch of other guys had a better night. It was amazing.
It was just no one could get anyone out. It was just one of those games, and it's ironic because those kind of games, you ask any pitcher, and they'll tell you, "I hope the phone doesn't ring for me." It's just one of those games where no one's getting anybody out, and ironically, it turned later because I got in because I really wanted to get in. It had to be part of the game.
David Johnson got thrown out of the game early. Do you know what he did for the rest of the game, where he was and what he was doing?
I think I mentioned, didn't I, the Bud Lights and the Chick-fil-A earlier? No. It was you've been around Davey a lot. Davey, one of the great things about Davey, not only his great baseball acumen, not only his intelligence, but Davey's kind of a free spirit, you know? Kind of marches to the beat of his own drum. And I'm sure that Davey and the rest of the team had a blast in that clubhouse. I'm sure they were working on their golf game with chipping and putting. I'm sure that they were intent on watching the games. And I know that Davey, when he was the manager, and this is my feeling, I don't know if it's correct. A lot of managers today might relay what they would like to have done in the game. If you threw Davey out, he's out. Someone else started. So the clubhouse guys that night in Atlanta deserved the biggest raise ever because they had a clubhouse full of guys, literally from midnight to 4:00 in the morning. And when the game was over, I'll never forget this. So in Atlanta has this, what is it, MARTA, Mass, the Mass Atlanta Rapid Transport, whatever it is. So it was just local buses that would take us back to the hotel. And this one bus, I don't know if you guys know, when 2 buses are attached with kind of that rubber in between both the buses. So the bus takes us back, but it had been raining all day. We hit a low spot, and water came up to shin high in the bus. So not only had we just won the game, but now everyone was wet as we kind of walked into this beautiful hotel that we're staying at. All the players was wet as well.
And what was the scene like the next day? So that was a Thursday night, and then you go into a day on Friday, July 5th, and you are, if I'm looking at the box score now, Ron, because this is all I do because of my dad has cursed me with this. And Rick Aguilera, he threw a complete game. So here we are using all these pitchers and all these players, and the next day you get a guy to go out there to throw 9 innings.
Well, your dad will remind you, 80s baseball, if there was a game that went extra innings the night before, the next guy owned it and wore it. So if Rick had an option to throw a complete game, great game, or the other option was to give up 11 runs and be out there for a complete game as well. Out there. And Rick, he had elbow issues with us, but we always knew he was going to be great. And I'm glad he found his niche as a reliever with the Twins, because he was going to be as good as all the other young pitchers that we had there at the time.
Jeff, back to Davey Johnson for a minute, just to show you how things work. Bob Clappish, who covered the team, good friend of Ronnie, good friend of mine, he told me that he was once in the Mets clubhouse at 6:30 for a 7:00 game. Now they they get rid of you at like 3:45 and you're not allowed back in. He's in at 6:30 and they're having a team meeting. And Davey looks at Clapp and says, Clapp, you got to get out of here. We're having a team meeting. And then he said, never mind, you can stay. So a writer stayed in a team meeting at 6:30 before a 7:00 game. That's the way it worked, right, Ron?
That's the way it worked. Davey on Sundays really believed in the day of rest. He never got to the ballpark before 12 o'clock for a 1 o'clock game. So our clubhouse literally would be everyone in front of where the lineup card would be, kind of complaining about Davey being late. And they would just stand there waiting for him to come in. Office, the lineup would come out and guys would go, hey, I'm in there. All right, let's go. It was literally like, when kids are freshmen in their freshman year and they try out for the basketball team and they want to see if they make the cut. That's what Sundays were like.
Yeah. Jeff, the Mets had a crazy reliever who was very good, Roger McDowell. Now, I read this, Ron, but I never confirmed it with Roger, even though I love talking to him. It said somewhere that he ate 7 cheeseburgers during that game. Is that true? And is that part of the litter that was in there when you rolled in at 4 a.m.?
No, 100%. We had guys on that team that could eat like I've never seen guys eat, and Roger was one of them. 7 to me is, if you had said 10, I would have believed. That's how many. I remember the first time I took Dwight Gooden at 19 years old to a steakhouse in Chicago, Morton's. I'm sure you've been there, Tim. We went there and we all ordered our meal like anyone would order. You order steak and a baked potato, maybe some broccoli or whatever. And the order went to Dwight, and Dwight said he'd have a steak as well, a baked potato, broccoli. I'll have an extra steak, and then can we share a lobster? I mean, that was his order at 19 years old, but he could eat 10,000 calories a day.
That's just unbelievable. So, Ron, also Terry Tata worked the plate that night, and I read somewhere that he told Howard Johnson on a questionable strike call, he said, hey, it's the 13th inning, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, everything is a strike. Did that indeed happen?
That definitely did happen. Terry, after a while, kind of relayed it to both sides that just swing the bat. When you get deep into that box score and you want to look at pitches thrown, you'll find that most of the time the ball was put in play or someone struck out within 3 pitches. All the hitters on both sides knew, swing the bat, Terry's tired, so let's get out of here. But getting out of there was the tough part.
Ron, I was a Little League umpire for years. It was one of my favorite jobs of all time. And I can't even begin to tell you that the amount of times I told coaches of a 12U rec league, hey, you see those clouds? We got to get this game in. So everybody's throwing strikes and everybody's swinging, and they'd say, Blue, where was that? And I said, it's a strike. I don't care where it was. We got to get this game done. The thought that an umpire was saying that about a Major League Baseball game is just iconic. That's unbelievable.
Well, one of the great nuances of playing baseball and in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, before they started giving a report card to these poor umpires now, is that every umpire was nuanced. You would go into a game, I would look on the board, I'd see that so-and-so was going to be the umpire. I knew his exact strike zone. I knew where to get a strike. I knew where he wasn't going to call a strike. I knew how far I could go as far as questioning his strike zone. It was a fun back and forth. It really personalized all the umpires to all of us, and I miss that.
Right, I do too.
You wouldn't even just prep for the batters you were going up against. You would also prep knowing, okay, I know I can get that inside fastball on this umpire because he loves calling an inside fastball as a strike.
Oh yeah,
That's crazy.
there's a phrase that analysts use now. They'll say an umpire is hunting for strikes. So you'd know a guy who was not going to call a strike. So that means contact night. If you're a pitcher, you're going to make the guys put the ball in play, and hopefully your fielders make the play. Or tonight could be one of those strikeout nights because it's a guy hunting strikes, and he's going to give you a little off the edges. So it was fun. It was like an advanced chess game.
Ron, how many people were left in the crowd at 4:00 in the morning? It must have been a sellout to begin with because it's July the 4th. Did most of the people stay for the end of the game?
I wouldn't say most of the people, but I remember looking into the crowd around maybe the 14th, 15th inning, and my one thought was, "Wow, there's still a lot of people here." I mean, so there had to be a significant crowd. Maybe 10,000, 12,000. I mean, that's a lot of people to start. They probably got there at 4 for the 6 o'clock game. We're originally supposed to start at 6, and it was 4 when the game ended. So they spent a good hearty 12 hours in downtown Atlanta.
Ron, have you noticed, by the way, that I'm wearing an Hawaiian shirt in your honor? I mean, I look terrible in it, but do you notice I'm wearing that just for you?
Not for everybody, Tim. I'll tell you. Pretty funny. We had a summer event for our local broadcast in the Mets, and we had to wear Hawaiian shirts. And one of the analysts said, "Boy, you look great in a Hawaiian shirt." I said, "You do know I'm from
Ron,
if you look good in a Hawaiian shirt, it's got to be."
My dad, we got on a little bit before you did, and he said, "I'm going to go change into my Hawaiian shirt." Jeff, do you think that's a good idea? I said, "Dad, I've never met Ron Darling in my life. You've known him for 44 years. You're going to ask me if I think he's going to take it offensively? I don't know what to tell you, Dad."
Every man owns one Hawaiian shirt from their one trip to Hawaii for the luau they went to.
Right. Ron, I want to say I lived in Las Vegas for 5 years, which is commonly known as the Ninth Island.
Ninth Island, yeah.
And it has a heavy Hawaiian influence, everything from obviously the people, but the food. And I remember our promotions director at my radio station that I worked at there, his name is Ryan Kawamoto, and he's from Hawaii. And
Nice.
He would teach me all of these slang words. And so we would always, and I'm only going to say this to you, but he would always say, we would say, "Hey, Sa, what's up, brah?" Like he was letting me in the fold. But if I ever did something very like white boy, he would say, "Oh, Howley boy, you can't do that." So I'd be sitting there saying, "Oh, I just got a cheeseburger from McDonald's." He said, "Howley boy, come on."
What's so funny is that to this day, my parents are both alive, and my mom is Hawaiian Chinese, and my dad is the whitest man in America. She calls him Howley, and he calls her Wahine. So they still speak pidgin to each other. So it's great.
That is so cute.
Ronnie, when we had Keith on, we had to ask the gratuitous question about being in Seinfeld and all that. But you were in one of Jeffrey's favorite movies and my favorite movie, one of my favorite, Day After Tomorrow. And tell us about that role and the role that you played.
Well, there was a certain amount of time, for whatever reason, people wanted me in movies, and I did like 3 right in a row. Day After Tomorrow was a really good movie. I did Shallow Hal as well, Fairley Brothers. And the Shallow Hal one is pretty funny because the Fairley brothers were in Hawaii. They were writing the script for this movie, and every day there was a Hawaiian kid who sold juice on the side of the road. And as they started to write this Shallow Hal story, they incorporated this kid who was writing up with the idea of an alternate world, people that look a certain way, but you see them as supermodels or whatever. And once they incorporated the script, they got back to Rhode Island where they're from, and they said, "Boy, this is great, but we're going to need like a Hawaiian guy who's kind of the alternate universe." And they go, "I don't know any Hawaiian guy. Do you know any Hawaiian guy?" He goes, "Isn't that Ronnie Darling from the Mets who played the Sox in '86? Like a Hawaiian dude."
That is so great. And you played a broadcaster in The Day After Tomorrow, didn't you?
I did. I was like a weather broadcast weatherman. So Bob Murphy, the great radio announcer for the Mets for all those years, was a weatherman in the Navy. So I made sure that I tried to hold his proud as a weatherman in a movie. But what's funny about these movies is that they always say to me, say, okay, so you're going to be a weatherman from Hawaii. So, kind of use the vernacular that they use there. I lived in Hawaii for 3 years. I was raised in Worcester, Massachusetts. I've dropped my R's until I started TV. I know bubblers. I know grinders. I know I'm a Massachusetts kid, so whenever anyone asks me to really go overly Hawaiian, I'm always lacking.
Well, Ron, I wish my dad had consulted you before he made his big acting debut on Brockmire, where he had like 3 lines, and the one big line, and we've told this on the podcast before, was he. You got to give it to him, Dad.
It was so bad, Ron. I was in Brockmire one episode. We had one shooting date. I had like 5 lines. 4 of them were like, "Hey, Jim, how's it going?" And the one that I had to say properly was Barbara Streisand. I loved her in Yentl. And I, of course, said, Barbara Streisand, I loved her in Lentil instead of Yentl. So it was just so galactically bad of a mistake that they ran it in the show because it made me look so stupid. And so that was my acting debut. You were way better than I was as an actor.
And Hank Azaria, Ron, he picked it up like that and said, Tim, you mean Yentl? Yes. And Dad's reaction and his laugh is in the show, and it really is like a dunce moment. He couldn't believe he did that.
Right.
I don't know much about comedy and TV, but if you ask the Marx Brothers, soup always
yes,
works.
absolutely. All right, Ron, before we let you go, every episode we have what we call a Team Tim, where I come up with a team of baseball players based on whatever. When we had we have all sorts of names for things. So when we had the Eclipse, I came up with the All Eclipse team, Wally Moon, things like that, So since you're on, Ron, I'm going to present the All Romance team in honor of you. Okay, so our catcher, and you'll know most of these guys. Rick Sweet is the catcher. Ryan Court at first is our first baseman. Back when Ron and I were young, maybe we were a little too young, used to court a woman. So that's where Ryan Court came in. Ryan Bliss is the second baseman. Jonah Bride, still active, is our third baseman, which I love. Joe Sparks is the shortstop.
Yeah.
Bobby Valentine, of course, who Ron knows exceptionally well. Bo Aldred, spelled Beau. And there's a guy, I didn't cover him, named Beauty McGowan. So he's one of our outfielders, and our pitching staff is led by Ron Darling. We had Slim Love. We have Richard Lovelady, who is still active. We had Brian Wu, who pitches for the Mariners, and my favorite is Buddy Groom. I just wish that Buddy Groom was still pitching, because if he faced Jonah Bride in a game, Jonah Bride against Buddy Groom, it would be the greatest at bat in baseball history.
I love the All Romance team. I'm happy to be part of it. They don't start playing the music while I speak here, but maybe on the bench, since we had Bobby Valentine, we'll put Ellis Valentine on the bench. Yes,
and Ellis was on. He didn't make the cut. I just figured there was more of a connection to former Mets manager Bobby Valentine than Ellis Valentine, who, by the way, Ronnie, you remember, played for the Rangers, and I covered him. Right. And famously, Ellis Valentine looked at me one day and said, I got more talent in my pinky finger than most of these guys have in their entire body. You can see him saying that, right?
100% end up being an indictment of him as opposed to a great word.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Well, Ron, that was tremendous fun. Thanks for playing along with all this nonsense, and thank you for your amazing recall on that game 40 years ago.
Well, the next time we get together, let's do it in person. We got to have a cold beer or something together, Jeff, because I have to see you guys together speaking at the same time with box score.
Are you sure this might be an AI filter and we're really the same person?
listen, if we find out, 100 years from now that Shohei Ohtani was AI, would you be surprised?
Wouldn't be.
Would not. There's nothing like him ever. All right. Thanks again, Ron.